Hello everybody, how are you guys doing? This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and welcome back. So while we're going to focus on Nintendo today, it's very interesting because this topic about Nintendo I wanted to discuss was actually inspired by Microsoft, as weird as that may sound. So the genesis of this conversation came from Microsoft's recent announcement in the last few weeks that they are actually going to be, for the most part, skipping E3 proper this year, and they're actually going to be moving to a different convention center, which is a little bit kind of far away from the LA Convention Center where E3 typically happens, and they're going to be holding their own event and their own press conference there, as opposed to at E3 at the LA Convention Center, and they're really not going to have much of a presence even on the show floor, which is probably the most shocking piece of information that I've learned from all of this. They're going to have a very, very small section of the show floor set aside for kind of like their Mixer streaming service demos, and that's really all they're going to do. They're really not going to be effectively at E3. Press conference won't be there, their game demos, their whole show floor, all of that stuff is going to be primarily set up at what I think is called the LA Live Center or Convention Center, or some sort of location that, again, is just kind of right down the road from the E3 Convention Center. So basically what we're seeing is Microsoft follow the steps that Nintendo first took when they decided to first step away from E3, specifically and only with their press conferences. And then, of course, in the last couple of years, Electronic Arts has also stepped away pretty much entirely from E3 by having both their press conference and all their show floor and their demos and stuff in a different location, where they do EA Play, I believe is the event that happens in the couple of days leading up to the official start of E3. And then, of course, we now have Microsoft following suit and doing the same thing. Now, all of this information and Microsoft's decision here, it's pretty crazy. There's some of it that's exciting, there's some of it that's disappointing. At the end of the day, for myself and most of us who are going to be following E3 and all the stuff of that week from home, and for me it's by choice. I could go to E3 if I wanted to, but I'm not going to even worry about that this year. Maybe not even next year, but eventually I'll probably make it back. However, I'm going to be following E3 and getting everything from home and from my computer and my phone and all that stuff, just like a lot of you guys. And so it doesn't really affect us in that way, but what it does start to do is sort of set the tone for what's maybe happening with E3, and it's also setting the tone for the industry at large. And we're seeing companies step away from this big convention where everyone comes together, which, to be fair, happens a couple of times a year. There's Paris Games Week, there's E3, there's Tokyo Game Show, there's GDC. All of these things that happen annually, we're seeing these companies step away from it, and we're seeing companies want to do their own thing on their own time and on their own space. Nintendo does Nintendo Directs throughout the year, and then for E3, they hold their own E3 showcase separate from the E3 floor and convention center itself. We now have Microsoft doing it, we have EA with EA Play, and we even have Sony doing it with PlayStation Experience at the end of the year every year as well. And so with all of this information, let's bring this back and focus it onto Nintendo, which is what I really wanted to discuss. We have Sony with the PlayStation Experience every year, their own show, their own couple of days set aside for just Sony and PlayStation information and hardware and games and reveals and demos and all of that stuff. We now have Microsoft doing it for E3 specifically. They're not doing it at their own time. They're doing it for the week of E3, but separate from E3, and this is probably going to be something that, honestly, I bet they're going to do for the foreseeable future. I don't know why they would decide to come back next year, unless it's just a colossal failure, but I think it'll probably go off just fine. So we now have Microsoft doing this. What about Nintendo? Yes, their presentation is separate from E3, but still, they themselves appear at E3. They set up a booth, they have this huge kind of, real estate on the show floor. They've got all their games and demos and systems and hardware there available for people to play like you normally would at E3. But what I wanted to discuss is whether or not Nintendo might want to, I guess it's kind of funny to say follow suit from Sony and Microsoft, but if they want to follow suit from Sony and Microsoft and also every year annually hold their own separate convention. Now, the other element to this that makes it really interesting is something that most of us are probably already aware of with this topic, and that is that back in the day, Nintendo used to do this. Most of us are familiar with Space World. Space World was Nintendo's old convention that they had every year. I think even before E3 was its own thing, and back when it was CES, which of course CES still continues, but way back in the day, like in the mid to late 90s, before E3 broke off and became its own thing, everything in the tech and video gaming world happened at CES, and that includes Nintendo, Sega, and Sony, and all of these companies going to CES to showcase their hardware, their games, and all that stuff that we typically now associate with E3. And back in those days, Nintendo had Space World, and it was this really awesome thing where Nintendo basically had, I don't even know, I mean, forgive me guys, I don't know if it was one day or a couple of days. I believe it was a couple of days. But they had some set amount of time where they basically had their own center kind of rented out, and they basically set up their own mini E3 that was Nintendo specific. I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with the very famous Zelda 2000 Space World demo. That was where we saw what Zelda might have looked like on the GameCube. This was in the year before the GameCube released, and before we knew it was going to become the Wind Waker instead. At the time, they showed off this amazing looking, you know, Link versus Ganon, crazy 3D polygon graphics that was so amazing and so exciting at the time. And it seemed like it was promising everyone that this is what the next Zelda is going to look like. You're used to the Nintendo 64 Zelda, but that's kids play. Look at this thing. And it was so freaking cool, man. We were all so excited. And then, of course, it became revealed the next year as the Wind Waker instead, which was a crazy shocking thing. And I mean, I don't even know if I've discussed it on the channel for you guys, but I was so shocked at Wind Waker at first, and I was disappointed for like a week until I realized I was excited. And then, of course, you know, now here we are so many years later, and it's probably still my favorite Zelda game. Yes, even over Breath of the Wild. But still, that was so cool, man. Those were great years. That was a great time when it made sense in the gaming industry for Nintendo, who absolutely ran and dominated gaming at that time before Sony really started to make their stamp and kind of change the face of gaming. At that time, Nintendo were the kings. They were like the defining characteristic of video games in the industry. And so it was very easy and made a lot of sense for Nintendo to be able to have their own convention, again, before E3 was a thing. But then over the course of the next 2 decades, coming up until today, a lot of things have changed in the gaming industry. Sony made a huge impact, changed the face and the tone of the industry, changed what even the face of the gamer started to look like. They really helped gaming mature in a lot of ways, which I think in hindsight is absolutely a very, very good thing. And, you know, Microsoft eventually stepped in. They've become really successful. PC gaming has gone insane. Now we have E3. CES really doesn't have much to do with gaming so much anymore. But we have E3, and we have the other, you know, 12,000 different conventions I mentioned at the beginning of this video. So where does that leave Nintendo? You know, that's the real question here. I think it's cool that Sony does PlayStation Experience because I enjoy PlayStation and Sony, and I think it's really neat that they do that for people to get some info and hands-on time, and every once in a while we might get a little bit of a surprise reveal or whatnot, and that's really cool. It's like, hey, fans of this platform and this company can come together and have a couple of days set aside for just experiencing this stuff from a company and a platform they love. Microsoft doing it this year for E3, again, we have to wait to see how it plays out to see if it's successful. I think it's going to be fine, and if it is, then there you go. You've got fans of Xbox having a couple of days separate from E3 to go and experience and learn about Microsoft stuff and their games and the Xbox platform and all their different plans and announcements and all of these things, and even their own press conference. I mean, a lot of cool stuff could really be happening there, and I'm excited to see how it plays out. So why wouldn't Nintendo want to do the same thing? And I have to say, as a fan, I mean, I absolutely want them to do this. I think a lot of us have talked about this for a long time, especially us older gamers who remember the time when Space World was a thing, before E3 really was the huge behemoth that it is today. It's like, man, I love Nintendo, for example. Nintendo's my favorite company, and I loved whatever their platform is at the time. Right now, it happens to be the Switch. And so why not give us a couple of days where Nintendo brings Nintendo fans and the industry and just the gaming world together to experience Nintendo. Just Nintendo. And I mean in person, because here's the thing. Nintendo is the only company doing something as amazing as Nintendo Directs. So to be fair, they already are doing something very unique to Nintendo that is focused solely on what Nintendo is and what they're making, and they give that to gamers throughout the year in Nintendo Direct presentations, which is freaking awesome. I love it. You guys love it. It's a really exciting thing that makes Nintendo really cool and special. But what about an in-person experience as well? With Sony and Microsoft being so successful, and even EA doing their EA Play thing, which is kind of whatever, but with them being so successful, I think it would be actually really cool if Nintendo decided to do this, and I would like to see this. Now, of course, there are a couple of logistical problems. I think the big thing is the money. We think about what it probably takes to put on something like this, and we know it has got to be expensive because you have to rent out some sort of space, whether it's an airplane hangar or a convention center or a humongous banquet hall, whatever it is, you got to rent that space out, so that's going to cost them money. You have to set up the demos, you have to have the hardware and the games available, set that stuff up, that's going to be expensive. You have to pay all your different developers to be able to make playable demos of whatever it is you're doing to have stuff available. You got to put together a presentation package for whatever your press conference is going to be. You have to be paying employees or interns or whatever to be able to run the show. As somebody who actually attended the Nintendo Switch reveal event in New York in January last year, I can tell you there's a lot of people there. There's probably 50 or 100 people there employed by Nintendo just to run the show, just to make this ship go. And so that's also got to cost a lot of money. Also, something else I think about with any convention, no matter what it is, that I think a lot of people have probably not paid attention to, is the fact that I would have to imagine that if you're going to put on a convention or attend a convention like E3 or TGS or whatever, you're also taking time away from the development of your games. Because I would assume you're taking part of the team working on, you know, XYZ game, and they have to be separate from the development process. They probably have to put together some sort of package, a trailer package, a gameplay reel, or a gameplay demo, and take separate stuff and elements from your game and make it presentable for whatever your presentation at this convention is going to be. And that becomes time, money, and resources taken away from the development of the game itself. I think that's a huge thing that a lot of companies consider when it comes to doing things like E3 or PlayStation Experience or EA Play or TGS or GDC or whatever. All of that stuff is another huge component. And so we know that Nintendo is a huge company, a very successful company, a very rich company. However, they aren't to the size and scale of their direct competitors, Microsoft and Sony. So Microsoft and Sony, it might be that much easier for them to afford to have a Microsoft event or a PlayStation Experience, whereas Nintendo, while they certainly could afford to do it, is it a smart affordability? Is it something where, based on their smaller size compared to their competition, is there really enough of a net gain for them to take the time and resources and money and effort set aside from their normal production schedule throughout the year to put on their own event in January or March or, you know, right before or right after E3 or even whatever they would want to do, you know, even if it's the brand new version of Space World, maybe they would come back and call it that. You know, that would be tough. I mean, heck, they're already doing, like, Nintendo World Championship events, which is awesome, by the way. Sometimes they're at E3, sometimes they're doing them outside of E3 in their own time. So that's kind of the first steps to them doing something like this, and they seem to be comfortable with that as far as how much time and money that seems to cost. What if they took those same events and turned them into just Space World? And at Space World, they would have championship competitions, but if it just became Space World where it's a whole show floor just like at E3, and they get to demo all their stuff, I think it could be cool, but there are all those logistical problems like I talked about. I mean, I've already said it 1,000 times in this video, so I'll say it one last time. The time, the money, the manpower, the resources, all of those things become a huge hindrance for a company like Nintendo. However, it's not impossible, and now that we've seen Microsoft be the third company to kind of step away and start to do their own thing that I think will become an annual event that is specific to just this company's hardware and products, maybe in the next couple of years, Nintendo realizes it's smart for them to do that as well. I mean, if anything, they're seeing so much success with the Switch right now, and there's no reason to think that that's going to stop. So they're making more and more money hand over fist. And if we envision that success another 3 years down the road, maybe they will be so overflowing with money, even more so than they are now, that they're like, yeah, it's that much easier for us to do this, and what we get in notoriety and advertising by doing an event like this is worth the money we're going to spend, and it keeps people invested in and excited in Nintendo and their new games because they have a reason to all come together once a year to experience whatever Space World or whatever convention they might want to have, newer versions of the Nintendo World Championships, all this stuff. So, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of it. There's not really a definitive answer here. I think my only answer is, as a fan, I want it to happen. As a fan, I think there are a lot of smart reasons for them to do it, but also, stepping aside from the fan perspective, there are a lot of reasons why I can imagine it's very hard and probably something they really won't do. I mean, let's be honest here. I want them to do it. It might make sense, but something tells me that this will really, truly never happen. Either way, those are my thoughts on this idea. I thought it would be an interesting and fun topic to discuss. I really would love to hear what you guys have to say. That's something else I was looking forward to, is how will you guys react? Do you think this sounds like a great idea? Do you think it sounds like a terrible idea? Do you see it as a possibility? Do you see it as an impossibility or not very likely? All sorts of information and opinions are welcome, of course. I really am curious what you guys think here. My next video is going to kind of relate to this too. I wanted to start with this topic and then make it a jumping point into the next topic about the fact that Microsoft is leaving E3 this year, maybe for the foreseeable future, and what that means. If it truly is a good thing, if it is a bad thing, what does that mean for the state of E3? All these different things. I think there's a really fun topic to have right there as well. So look forward to that in the next couple of days. But for now, discuss Nintendo and their own Space World, you know, annual Nintendo-focused event. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Discuss it below. That is it for me. Thanks so much as always for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.